noble, and valuable. This spirit must become the driving force behind all aspects of our Sri Dharma activities, academic, research, and community services. This spirit must become the driving force behind all aspects of our Sri Dharma activities,
reflects the spirit and
academic,
commitment
research,
to always
and
community and the values of humanity.
This spirit must become the driving force behind all aspects of our Sri Dharma activities, academic,
Iman saya lebih ringan dibandingkan versi yang sebelumnya, dan kami sertai dengan teknologi Android untuk bisa mengubah pola gerakan yang akan digunakan oleh masyarakat dibandingkan versi yang sebelumnya.
We are determined to become a world-class university, to be part
Okay, good afternoon once again, everyone, and welcome back. We are currently waiting for our moderator to join the session. We will begin the second panel discussion in just a few moments. Thank you for your patience.
I am just trying to get my windows organized here. Morning, everybody.
All right, sir. Thank you. Hello, Dr. George. Good afternoon. Thank you so much for joining us early. We really appreciate it. Just to let
Hi,
you
how are
know,
you guys?
we are still in the open gate phase, and your session will officially start in 30 minutes, which is 2:30. In the
Ah.
meantime, yes, in the meantime, please feel free to settle in, relax, or turn off your camera if you like. We will give you a heads up when we are about to start. Thank you.
Okay, so it's not till 8:30? I mean, it's not till 2:30,
yeah.
excuse me.
Yes. Sorry.
Great. Okay, so I have some time. All right, I'll come
Okay.
back.
Thank you.
Yep.
Faculty of Social and Political Sciences, Negoro. As a Dean, I would like to welcome you to join in our international class faculty, which is intended not only to provide opportunities for everybody to study here, but also to improve your experience, not only in the local experience, but also in the international level, in the world class level of faculty and university. In the local founded in 1969, IRUD is one of the leading faculties in Indonesia dedicated to academic excellence, research innovation, and community engagement in the fields of social and political science. We are part of IRUD Summer Course, a top public university in Indonesia that is committed to becoming a world-class university. Currently, IRUD is home to over 6,000 students, supported by more than 150 dedicated academic staff across 5 departments, including 6 undergraduate programs, 4 master degree programs, and 2 doctoral degree programs. Our disciplines range from public administration, government science, communication science, business administration, and international relations. We are proud to implement an outcome-based education curriculum aligned with global standards, emphasizing critical thinking, problem solving, ethics, and digital literacy. Our program also accredited nationally and internationally by IBAA, Foundation for International Business Administration Accreditation Germany. IRUD has strong collaboration accredited nationally and internationally by IBAA, Foundation for International Business Administration with national and international institutions, including Wyoming University, America, Arizona State University, the USA, Leiden University, Netherlands, University of Naples, Orientale, Italy, Nagoya University, Japan, Ryukyu University, Japan, the Hong Kong Polytechnic University, Chung-Ang University, South Korea, Busong University, South Korea, University of Malaya, Malaysia, University Kebangsaan Malaysia, Queensland University, Griffith University, Australia, and many more. We regularly host international workshops, seminars, visiting schools, summer schools, and also student exchange program as part of our commitment to global citizenship and academic diplomacy. Beyond teaching and research, we are deeply engaged in community development, policy advocacy, and capacity building programs with local governments, civil society, and international agencies. We believe that the university must not only generate knowledge but also contribute solutions to the real challenges faced by society. Our vision is clear: to become a world-class faculty that is globally competitive, socially impactful, and rooted in local wisdom. As we step forward into the future, we continue to nurture the spirit of collaboration, innovation, and integrity among our students and faculty members. I would like to express our sincere appreciation for your presence and support. We warmly welcome opportunities for joint research, academic collaboration, and meaningful partnership for mutual benefit. On behalf of the faculty, I would like to again welcome to the faculty. We are going to together with you, learning and developing together to provide your best
Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome back.
We hope you had a pleasant lunch break.
As we wait for the afternoon session to begin, we'd like to kindly remind everyone to complete your attendance through the link shared by our committee in the Zoom chat if you haven't done so already.
Please also take a moment to make sure your audio and internet connection are working properly. Feel free to keep your cameras on as more participants join us.
Our second panel discussion will begin shortly at 2:30 p.m. Thank you for joining us early, and we'll get started in just a few moments. Okay, good. Good afternoon once again, everyone, and welcome back. We hope you had a refreshing break and are ready for another engaging discussion.
Our next panel discussion will feature Dr. Nathaniel George from SOAS University of London, who will share his insight on migration and state power in contemporary international politics.
We are also pleased to once again welcome Mr. Muhammad Subhan, International Relations, who will continue serving as the moderator for this afternoon's discussion.
Without further ado, the floor is yours, sir.
Well, thank you, Akbar and Adi. Okay, everyone, today we will continue our second session today with Dr. Nathaniel George. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you, MC, for leading the sessions. Distinguished speakers, Dr. Nathaniel George, respected colleagues, committee member, and all of the participants of the IRUD Summer Course 2026. Welcome back to our second session today. My name is Muhammad Subhan. You can call me Subhan for short, from International Relations Department of Universitas Diponegoro. Okay, it is my pleasure to serve again as a moderator for this afternoon sessions. First of all, allow me to warmly welcome Dr. Nathaniel George. Is Dr. Nathaniel George has come and joined or not? Oh, he's still waiting for his attending. Okay. Okay, waiting for Dr. George. This morning we will discuss, we have discussed broadly presentation from genocide and difficult and relationship between international law, global politics, and power. And this afternoon, we will continue our discussion with another fundamental issue regarding international law and international politics. And it is about aggressions and the relation with the state power. Okay. Before we begin, allow me to remind all of the participants to keep your microphones and muted during the sessions. If you have some question, please write them in the chat box and waiting for the Q&A sessions. Okay, when you are trying to asking a questions, please mention your name and briefly introduce your institutions. Okay, now it is my great experience and pleasure to introduce our second distinguished speaker, Dr. Nathaniel George. Hello, Dr. George.
Hi, Subhan. Thank you for inviting me.
Thank you for your today's joining us in afternoon session. Okay, in Indonesia, it is afternoon, and how about your place
So
currently, Dr. George?
I'm joining from London, and it
London?
is the morning. Yeah.
Oh, in the morning. That's great.
Yeah.
Okay. Please, committee, can you show us the CV or to Dr. George? Okay, let me briefly introduce our second speaker today, Dr. Nathaniel David George, a lecturer in politics and of the Middle East, Department of Politics and International Relations, SOAS University of London. Dr. George is a lecturer in politics of the Middle East and at the Department of Politics and International Relations. As I have mentioned before, his academic work focused on politics and the history of Middle East, including Lebanon, Palestine, revolutions, counter-revolutions, international politic dynamics in the regions. Dr. Josh has completed his PhD in history at the Rice University with this dissertation on revolutions, counter-revolution, and the empire in Lebanon. He also has held academic positions and fellowships at the several leading institutions such as Harvard University, Columbia University, and the University of Oxford. Dr. George, thank you again for being with us today. Now we have approximately 1 hour to present your materials. Follow up with 30 minutes Q&A sessions. Without further ado, please, Dr. George, the floor is yours. Okay.
Thank you, Subhan. I'm
The screen is
starting the
ready. Okay.
screen. Oops. 1 second. Let me just get the screen back. Share. Okay. Can you see the screen that I'm sharing? Oh, it disappeared.
It doesn't appear yet.
1 second. One more. How about now?
Oh, all right, clear.
Okay. Well, thank you again for inviting me to this international school. I haven't previously had the pleasure of visiting or engaging with Indonesia before, so I'm excited and honored to be able to connect with you all here. Special thanks, especially to Dewey and the organizing committee for managing the logistics in a very clear way, especially given the great distance between us in time and space. So many thanks for your smooth organization and support. So today I've been asked to give a talk on aggression and state power in contemporary international politics. And as you might probably guess or expect, with my expertise on the Middle East, I'll be addressing this primarily with regard to Southwest Asia, or as it's better known, the Middle East. And I'll be speaking today also in reference to aggression, to the most aggressive power in the world today, which is currently the United States of America. And its even more aggressive junior partner, the State of Israel, in the central region of power contestation today, the Middle East or Southwest Asia, the Middle East being this more Eurocentric denomination, to the middle of where and to the east of what. The relationship between Israel and the United States is often a matter of contested debate between those who insist that the US is exclusively calling the shots with little interference or suggestion by its partner Israel and the Zionist lobby in the US, And those, on the other hand, who see the Israel lobby as leading U.S. policy in the region, perhaps even domestically in key areas, and that is distorting U.S. interests in a counterproductive way. In my view, both either insisting on either extreme, in my view, are both wrong, and a synthesis is really needed between these positions. Is necessary to explain how the relationship has changed over time and according to place and conjuncture. We can discuss this theme more in the Q&A, as the exact nature of U.S.-Israeli relations is not the main focus of my talk, although the alliance itself and what it's seeking to do and how it functions in the world more generally is what I'm interested in talking about. So the United States is a great power, the most powerful hegemon in international institutions, in global political economy, and especially through the dollar's role as the global reserve currency, their ability to exercise wide control on banking and financial markets through the dollar. Global military power is no one that holds a candle to the United States in total assets and spread. The United States possesses all manners of ideational or ideological power through media, entertainment, and educational influence. And putting this all together really distinguishes the US head and shoulders above any rival in the world. Closest challengers, perhaps China, and further away from it still, Russia, do not command any similar level of influence in all those fields. Although, for instance, China's economic influence, in particular, is becoming, as widely remarked, extremely powerful. It does not exercise the sway over international institutions, finance, and military in the world that the U.S. does. So this is the big context. So in talking about the theme of aggression and state power today, we're going to be talking about the scene that's set by the United States. In some ways, it might be novel in the broad sweep of history to think about crimes of aggression or aggression in itself as something to think about and minimize, as most of world history has been governed by empires, not representative nation states, empires that have been explicitly hierarchical polities, that have been built through conquest and ruled by monarchs without the pretense of representing a popular will or having limits to their power. The crime of aggression was codified only after the victorious Allied powers, the United States, Britain, France, Soviet Union, but after the Second World War in the Nuremberg Charter and Judgment. So this is where, when we talk about aggression today, that people are drawing from. And I'm not going to read all of this, but defining in the Charter document of 1945, defining aggression as a crime against peace, namely the planning, preparation, or initiation of a war of aggression or a war in violation of international treaties, agreements, or assurances, participation in a common plan or conspiracy for the accomplishment of any of the foregoing, including war crimes, violations of the laws and customs of war, which are including but not limited to murder, ill treatment, deportation, slave labor, any other purpose of or for any other purpose the civilian population of an occupied territory, the murder or ill treatment of prisoners of war, to clean up hostages, plunder of public or private property, wanton destruction of cities, towns, or villages, or devastation not justified by military necessity. Going further, the Nuremberg Charter defined crimes against humanity, namely murder, extermination, enslavement, deportation, and other inhumane acts committed against civilian populations, any of them, before or during a war, persecutions on religious or racial grounds in execution of or connection with any crime within the jurisdiction of the tribunal. And so this is how aggression and war crimes, crimes against humanity, was defined in the post-World War II moment that defined the structure of world order. After that incredibly violent war killing tens of millions of people around the world. The 1946 judgment, about 1 year later after the opening of the tribunal, gave the crime of aggression an even heavier definition. Quote, to initiate a war of aggression, therefore, is not only an international crime, it is, quote, the supreme international crime, differing from other war crimes in that it contains within itself the accumulated evil of the whole. So everything of crimes against peace, war crimes, crimes against humanity are contained in the act of a war of aggression. These conventions at Nuremberg largely set the precedent for standards of international humanitarian law and became a key reference in numerous domains, and particularly those of what became the modern human rights movement. Many scholars and activists have rightly criticized Nuremberg's highly selective and self-interested approach. It's not been uncritical, and people have not been uncritical of it. The Allied powers, namely the US, British, and French empires, were, after all, obviously guilty of many of the same crimes they were now punishing individual Nazis for, trying them, Nazi Germans. The US was founded, after all, in genocidal settler colonialism, developed through forced chattel slavery, a slave trade across continents. The British and French, too, were guilty of rapacious colonial exploitation and genocidal violence, all of the crimes listed and mentioned above in the aggression, and even were carrying them out during and after the Second World War, after they had been colonized effectively by Nazi Germany, Britain, or France especially. So scholars like Mahmoud Mamdani have argued that Nuremberg inaugurated what he calls the, quote, criminal model of understanding and responding to extreme violence. This criminal model is predicated on the liberal notion that, quote, all violence is the act of individuals. These are the words of Mamdani. Individual leaders were singled out for trial and punishment in the Nuremberg tribunals. However, the process left untouched the political constituency that these leaders served, the systematic nature of these crimes and their state actions. The mass support for Nazism in Germany and mass participation were left untouched. This enabled many Nazis to be incorporated into a new US-dominated state of the German Federal Republic, that is West Germany, popularly known as, and into the branches of the US state itself, or NATO, in the Cold War against communism. So I suggest that instead of aggression as a framing concept, although defining the crimes in the individual sense can be useful in demarcating what is to be prescribed behavior, but we should foreground that we live in a world system that encourages aggression, a world system of capitalist imperialism. Aggression is a structural feature of that system that shows up repeatedly across time and space. Aggression is not the structure itself, however. Imperialist powers and personalities may be more or less aggressive, but right now we have an extremely aggressive US administration, but the Biden administration that preceded it was also quite aggressive in enforcing a genocide that we'll be talking about a lot further, the genocide of Israel and Palestine, in Gaza, in Lebanon, etc. Not to mention many cases of foreign wars of aggression by the United States throughout its entire existence. Aggression does not define the overall system, however, which is driven economically by generalized capital accumulation, or an accumulation without end, something that's novel to the system of historical capitalism. Because accumulation by one group in one area depends on the exploitation of another group in another area, inequality should be seen as a structural feature of the system of accumulation. This economic system that joins the world together in a set of networks and relationships is politically superintended by the United States. No other power comes close to setting the rules and operation of the system. The driving commodities of this system in the 20th century, after post-world war, in the 20th century and after, have been fossil fuels, oil, gas, coal in their various forms, which enable tremendous energy outputs and portability in ways that other forms of energy could not. Political economy then exercises hegemony as the ruling ideas of our present governing classes around much of the globe, and especially the core regions of the world system. Now, one thing that's structural about this system of international relations, structured by capitalist imperialism, is a difference in inequality between core states that have sovereignty, political control, high wages, high manufacturing outputs of complex goods, and core and peripheral regions, which provide raw materials, have low wages, low incomes, far less political sovereignty and independence, for instance. Now, I don't think I'll be surprising anyone by reiterating that the geopolitical importance of Southwest Asia is directly related to its position as one of the most abundant and convenient sources of fossil fuel. So this brings us to the Middle East today. It's no coincidence, I argue, that the breakdown of the post-World War II order is occurring right now in Southwest Asia. The region held special significance in the construction of the US-directed post-World War II order, both economically and politically. Politically, the Allied victors marked the region as a space to enact atonement for the Jewish genocide in Europe. The condemnation of Nazi aggression and the genocide of Jews across Europe by European powers, various collaborators, not only the Nazis, this genocide was and has been continuously invoked to justify the Zionist colonization of Palestine, both at the time of the establishment of the State of Israel after the end of World War II in 1948, all the way to today. Not only was the colonization of Palestine justified, but so too has the Euro-American sponsorship of that colonization been cast as benevolent, righteous, and progressive, and a source, perhaps the source, of moral authority for the West on the world stage today, seen as a proof of their ability to atone for their crimes, and as seen as proof of even their anti-racism. Incredible. It's really incredible. But that's how it has been framed. Now, this framing of Israel and US and European support for the colonization of Palestine has put Palestinians in particular, and Arabs more generally, in an unenviable position of being racialized as an expendable population to be eliminated and subdued completely to make way for a higher grade race. As the incredible Palestinian intellectual Edward Said put it, Palestinians became the victims of the victims. Secondly, the tremendous oil reserves of the Middle East were also central to the material rise of the new Cold War order that set the United States against the Soviet world, as well as the decolonizing world in general. The oil resources of the region amounted to some 46% of the world's total at the end of World War II, and they were entirely under the control of Western empires and their private corporations at the close of World War II. Middle Eastern oil became the material base for the reconstruction of devastated Europe. The famous 1947 US Marshall Plan of tremendous US economic aid to European governments was tied to the containment of communism, the Soviet Union's influence, and the exclusion of communists from European governments, which after all had been leading the resistance against Nazism, fascism in Europe at the time, and had commanded support of large trade union federations and large blocs of voters. The competition with communism structured modes of state in the post-World War II order as well. Economic planning was adopted. State welfare services were seen as necessary in order to ensure legitimacy and loyalty of working classes to the new non-communist order. Rhetorical commitment was emphasized to anti-colonial principles, the idea of political independence, not being ruled by an alien power. These were not being exploited, enslaved, as the Nazis performed on their victims in Europe in the way that Aimé Césaire had long identified in the 1930s as the application of European colonialism in the colonial world, as it was in the export of that into Europe itself. So economic planning was adopted, state coordination of investment and resources, Keynesianism basically, was turned to in the US and in Europe in order to prevent a more decisive turn for state control, popular control that was represented by the global threat of communism, revolutions, anti-colonial independence movements. So the solution was the US New Deal and European social democracy. These were all energized as world trends after the Second World War and became the pillars of the post-World War II order. And if, as many historians, and it's commonplace to note that the seeds of the Second World War were laid in the way that the First World War was resolved, then we can take this further and say that the way that the Second World War was resolved is leading us to at least, if not necessarily a new world war in the present moment, the possibility of it, and a new historical conjuncture that is being brought about by the global ramifications of the regional and international war in the Middle East right now. The war taking place now is fundamentally still about these two issues, the two pillars of the post-World War II order in the Middle East. The first, political; the second, economic. The central issue that ties them all together into this potent force that we're seeing affect the domestic politics and international domestic politics of the West and of much of the East, and the war in this devastating regional war centered on the Eastern Mediterranean is the Zionist colonization of Palestine. Why? Because the question of Palestine is a structure of power relationships in the region. It unifies, creates a unifying thread in the relationships and balance of power on many levels in the Middle East, between first the citizens and their own domestic regimes, between the indigenous regional states, mostly Arab, but also Iran and Turkey, themselves, between these states themselves, are competing and connected by their politics of in relation to Palestine and Israel. It also structures the relationship between the regional states and Israel themselves as another level of struggle and contestation. It goes beyond the region itself as it structures relationships between all the states in the region and the great powers and the hegemon of the capitalist imperialist system, the United States, and also between the regional states and other great power centers like China, Russia, and Europe. So at every level in these layers, the question of Palestine is in contestation. Arab populations are overwhelmingly supportive and in solidarity with Palestinians in their struggle against Zionist colonialism, and have fought hard struggles in their own countries against their own ruling classes and regimes across the 20th century to support Palestine in various ways. Excuse me. In places like Lebanon, resistance movements have become institutionalized. In other places that even don't appear as being aligned with Palestine or resistance, the progressive activists in those societies, in monarchies like Kuwait, Jordan, Saudi Arabia, etc., have long fought to create space for supporting the Palestinian cause, winning some successes along the way that are often passed over or unremarked on. We can talk about that more in the Q&A if you're wondering too. The non-Arab regional states of Turkey and Iran, Palestine also plays a similar role. You can see in the regime of the pre-revolutionary regime of the Shah of Iran, which was one of the closest allies, not the closest ally of the United States between 1952, after the US overthrew the democratically elected government, installed a newly empowered Shah and ruled over with an iron fist in that country. Iran was a close ally of the United States. And after that popular revolution, which was in part driven by the relationship and opposition between the partnership between the Shah and Israel, you can saw the relationship change. So similarly, in Turkey, solidarity with Palestine is also widespread and has been advocated by leftists and Islamists in various regards. So Palestine is something that plays a role at multiple levels, all the way down to the relationship between domestic citizens and their states. So I pose the question, will the festering war in the Middle East right now, the absence of a just peace, lead to a new kind of world war today? Are we already in one? Perhaps only time will tell. This, I think, is the larger context and importance of the international and regional war that has been raging in the region since the 7th of October 2023. So now we'll zoom into regional politics further to discuss what's going on with aggression, what are the war aims right now of the aggressive parties, that is the US and Israel. So there's a reason why we can date the shift in the conjuncture and the structure of international relations to a precise day, the 7th of October 2023, because the struggle for Palestine is the central linchpin of the present war and global competition. We're seeing it now being expressed in the renewed war against Iran over global shipping routes, infrastructure in the Strait of Hormuz. This whole competition was ignited by the Palestinian spark, not from any direct conflict over oil and shipping itself, but it was tied to the struggle over Palestine. You can see how it unites many issues and is a linchpin of it. Of course, highlighting the significance of October 7th does not mean that the Hamas-led Al-Aqsa flood operation is the starting point of world history, or of how the present, or even the starting point of how the present war should be measured, as Zionist and state media and Western state media would have you believe. So you can also observe how this point of everything started on October 7th has been nearly dropped from Zionist and Western narratives lately after nearly 2 years of day after day stressing of October 7th, October 7th. What about October 7th? This is the beginning of, and this is the legitimation of the genocide that Israel unleashed for for over 1,000 days now in Gaza, in the region. Now, so don't get me wrong, I'm not saying history starts at October 7th. The first part of the lecture wasn't telling you, situating the global context of the post-World War II order and how the US has dominated. But nonetheless, October 7th, we can see it as a shift in the global conjuncture. Now, why? 78 years after the Nakba, which is catastrophe in Arabic, the Nakba being Israel's ethnic cleansing of around 750,000 Palestinians, 3/4 of the Palestinian population at the time. Still, despite that tremendous violence, that ethnic cleansing of 3/4 of the population, the occupation of all Palestine in 1967, the Zionist project remains incomplete according to its own aims, and according to its own perception. The state is insecure according to the perception of many leading Israeli Jewish politicians and their constituencies. Zionist cabinet members like Bezalel Smotrich, historians like Benny Morris, once hailed as a leading revisionist historian, critical new Israeli historian who unearthed the history of the Nakba in Israeli archives, and scores of Israeli soldiers who scrawl threats of a new Nakba on occupied Palestinian homes and even Lebanese homes, and abroad. They all agree on one thing across the Zionist political spectrum, that Israel did not finish the job in 1948. This was a great historical error that must be corrected today. Right-wing Zionists, both religious and secular, have been making the argument for a new Nakba for decades now. And right-wing Zionism has come to almost has totally eclipsed labor and liberal Zionism as a political force in Israel in recent years. Israel was governed and established overwhelmingly by the Labor Party from its early form of colonization, the British Mandate period, all the way through the late 70s and even into the 90s. And I agree with the Oslo Accords was affected by a labor Zionist government, and now labor Zionism held hardly something like 2 or 3 seats in the Knesset. So we have a shift in Zionism itself. It has always been about the structure of elimination of the native, but there is a structural shift in the ruling ideas about how frankly you can discuss things like the elimination of the native. As scholars of settler colonialism like Patrick Wolf have powerfully made clear, this is not something unique to Israel. It is a structural condition of settler colonies, and Israel is no different. The state is structurally built on the elimination of a native, which can take place in a variety of forms, from literal elimination through outright killing and forced displacement, to ethnic cleansing on a smaller scale, to genocide that we're currently witnessing. It can also incorporate, and does all at the same time, political elimination and reduction via systems of apartheid, subjugation, and subordination. Now, to be clear, to be indigenous or native is a relationship to someone else, another figure of the settler. Indigenous is not, or native is not best understood as membership in a race or with a presence of a particular amount of blood quantum, a level of ethnicity, as what has been discussed, for instance, in the United States, and used to be measured by literal laws about to determine which race you belong to, levels of blood quantum, and therefore which had a relationship to the rights that were accorded in the polity. Now, the practices of settler colonialism is what makes the native and the settler. There's no native without the presence of a settler, and there's no settler without the presence of a native. It's a dialectical social relationship. It's not about how long you have lived on a particular territory. Your family can have lived there for generations, but you enjoy the structural privilege of the settler polity, which goes out to destroy the indigenous or native polity and erect a new one in which sets the boundaries of inclusion strictly around excluding the native. So this is what settler colonialism is about. This is what structures the Israeli state as well as the United States, as well as Australia, Brazil, many other countries in the world. But Israel is a particularly aggressive manifestation of it, and its relationship to the region and the great powers of the world is what is changing things right now. It's been clear to many Palestinians and Arabs from the signing of the Oslo Accords and even before, and all the talk surrounding the potential of a two-state solution since the mid-1970s, that Israeli leaders will never accept either political equality between Israelis and Palestinians or the establishment of a Palestinian state, barring the idea of equality. This understanding of the structurally racist and discriminatory nature of the Israeli state is important for determining and understanding Israel's current war aims. Israel's record has shown it will accept no Palestinian state or self-governing entity whatsoever, and nothing less than functionally demilitarized states all around its borders, in Lebanon and Syria under contestation now, but also Jordan and Egypt on its borders, which have become functionally demilitarized in terms of its relationship between Israel and Egypt, or Israel and Jordan. They're allowed to have, these states have armies and militaries that work in concert with the United States and Israel. And that's the only reason why they're allowed to currently have armaments, for instance, on a wide scale. In Lebanon and in Syria right now, you're seeing a total war against, and in Palestine itself. And even in Iran, laughably, rather, that was their goal as well, to demilitarize these states, basically. As historian Osama Makdisi has recently argued, we might then think about Israel's models for relations with its neighbors and with the world based on two models in its colonization of Palestine. Now, Osama Makdisi wrote an article about its relation to Lebanon, but I would also generalize this to its relationship to all regional states. And these modes of interaction are based on Israeli modes of colonization of Palestine itself. The first model of Israeli relationship is the West Bank, where Israel controls all entries, exits, airspace, roads, and financial flows. And a nominal native authority, the Palestinian Authority, represents an Arab facade, to use a British imperial term that they set up for the Mandate period, and specifically in Egypt and Iraq. The idea, the cabinet spoke at the end of World War I as, we need to establish a quote Arab facade, to have a native Mohammedan rule over these states in a municipal level, basically, while we, the empire, decisive control of what really matters: the military, the commanding heights of the economy, the infrastructure, the resources. So the Palestinian Authority is a continuity with that British colonial project and imperial rule in general. The Palestinian Authority's remit is limited to the municipal administration of Palestinian villages, towns, and cities, and importantly, the policing of actual or potential Palestinian resistance against Israel. The PA is responsible principally to Israeli interests rather than its own people, and it has no basis for popular representation. The President Mahmoud Abbas, his term expired in January 2009, and the Palestinian Legislative Council, the idea of a local representative parliament in Palestine, expired in January 2010. There's no domestic political legitimacy for the PA, yet there's not also an attempt or the ability to overthrow it. We can talk about that in the Q&A as well. So that's one model of administration and governance with the region: control, install a pliant government with little more than municipal powers. If it has military power, it will only be allowed to be working on behalf, to be policing Arab resistance against any potential resistance. So that's the West Bank model. The second Israeli model for relations with the region is Gaza. And the Gaza model is genocide. As defined by the Genocide Convention, this means, quote, deliberately inflicting on the group conditions of life calculated to bring about its physical destruction in whole or in part. We can see the attacks, the total erasure in Gaza of educational infrastructure, medical infrastructure, houses themselves, domicide. So we have scholasticide, domicide, medicide. It's the total, the takeover of the Gaza Strip. 60% of the Gaza Strip has been, is all that's left for cramped Palestinians living there. And the Israeli leaders are openly talking about taking that to 100%, in defiance of the so-called ceasefire that was established between Hamas and Israel. Now, these two models are ideal types. They're not mutually exclusive. Elements of the Gaza model are present in the West Bank, and elements of the West Bank model are present in Gaza in the way that it tries to deal with Palestinian population there. Israel's preferred method of the two appears to be Gaza, as the genocide of Palestinians is presumed to lead to a future of unimpeded settler sovereignty. Both models seek not just the subordination of adversaries, but their total demilitarization. And in both models, once the brute application of Israeli force ends, they seek to Israel's model seek to impose a ceasefire that applies to the adversaries alone, while Israel alone remains full freedom of military action. This has been practiced in Palestine, and this is being generalized in the region, attempting to be generalized in the region, in Lebanon, in Syria, in Israel. It's already been applied in Jordan and Egypt, basically. Now, the mechanism used to achieve either solution along the lines of the Gaza model or the West Bank model is entirely unrestrained military action. Importantly, unrestrained Israeli military action is not something that is limited to achieving their colonial goals in Palestine, which makes this more than a local issue to the Middle East. Israeli actions and their international sponsorship by Western states don't just ignore international humanitarian law, the laws of war, customary relations between states and societies, or even the customs of war or governance, but they are intended and are affecting to undermine these standards, laws, and customs completely, to change the structure of global governance. Israel's foreign allies and supporters are in the US and Europe are among the first to realize this, and they are very clearly realizing this. For instance, for decades in the US, there has been a current of public opinion, political opinion, who have argued against what they call the Vietnam syndrome. Quote, the public's reluctance to vigorously deploy US military force abroad due to the disastrous experience of the US defeat in Vietnam in 1975, 50 years ago or so. Despite decades of involvement in Vietnam, billions of dollars committed, tens of thousands of US lives sacrificed, and more importantly, millions of lives in Vietnam, Laos, and Cambodia were extinguished by this American war. The Vietnamese and other peasant and the Allied peasant revolutionaries imposed defeat on the most advanced military in the world. This defeat was not easy for a US state or society to swallow, and its lessons have hardly been absorbed. Many Americans would struggle even to identify the criminal war in Vietnam as a defeat. Unconsciously denying the Vietnamese resistance, they would be more likely to call it a tragic mistake or some kind of a mistake. They don't understand it as a defeat for American goals. Now, to go back to the Vietnam syndrome and the conservative opinion about it, there are those that argue the US lost this war because it fought with, quote, one hand tied behind its back. That's the argument. Because the US military, in their estimation, was prevented from using all possible methods and armaments. Basically, they're talking about nuclear war, the inability to just annihilate the entire existence of Vietnam. They say that the American victory was prevented because of liberal civilian politicians imposed limits on military conduct, and also disloyal liberal subjects who protested against the war in the United States by the millions. Now, to anyone remotely familiar with the way that the US prosecuted that catastrophic war, systematically targeting the means of social reproduction in Southeast Asia, forced removals of entire villages, total environmental destruction and poisoning, killing people today, heavy aerial bombings, they ought to find such a conclusion that the US fought with one hand tied behind its back laughably reprehensible. Yet the idea persists and has obtained huge purchase on the US right wing. It's concretely embodied by the present US Secretary of War, Pete Hegseth, who has made a career of criticizing the US military for being too restrained, for focusing too much on diversity, equity, and inclusion rather than deadly lethality. And that and he changed the name of the Secretary of Defense back to the Secretary of the Department of War, for instance. His whole being is clearly invested in a commitment to aggression and militarism. And he's now in charge of the US military apparatus. As historian Melanie McAllister has shown, US conservatives who argue that the US lost in Vietnam due to a betrayal by liberal politicians found a new model that pleased them, new object of worship, and that became Israel. They found in Israel a counter argument. Israel fought for, with them, what McAllister calls was the, quote, the good fight, by forcibly pursuing its enemies without qualms or restrictions. And that always came out on top. They started making this article immediately in the 1970s. Even before the US defeat in Vietnam was clear, they saw the 1967 war, the total and the decisive and criminal methods used as the type of policies that the US itself should use. This is an important chunk of support for Israel in the United States and around the world in general. Those who see its disproportionate military action and its racist policies carried out in the face of popular opprobrium or opposition that has even been growing in the past few years, especially. They see this type of state power and aggression as their own preferred manner of dealing with challenges. This militarist worldview was not even necessarily limited to explicit conservatives alone. Many US liberal Cold Warriors held similar views, as, after all, the former president Joe Biden, a Democrat, a liberal, and many economically in the US considered more in line with social democracy, did a lot to reinvest in many foolhardy ways, but ended a certain mode of neoliberal austerity in the United States by doing massive government investment, so far short of the Green New Deal and things that were called for. But he has been a determined militarist both at home and abroad, and especially a staunch supporter of Israeli genocide in Gaza, a genocide which he could have stopped had he wanted to. So for the global right and the forces of order in the world, the actions Israel represent the preferred solution to challenges that are currently facing the world. This kind of perspective was echoed in an important speech in November 2023, just 1 month into the Israeli genocide, by Colombian President Gustavo Petro at the COP28 United Nations Climate Change Conference in Dubai. He said, and I quote, "I invite you, all of you, to imagine a combination of facts, projection of climate crisis in 5 or 10 years, and the current genocide of the Palestinian people. Are these facts disconnected? Or can we look at Gaza as a mirror for the immediate future? The unleashing of genocide and barbarism on the Palestinian people is what awaits the exodus of the peoples of the South unleashed by the climate crisis." It's talking about how there will be necessarily an exodus of people from the global South, from the formerly colonized countries, from the peripheral countries of the world capitalist system towards the rich areas of the global North, the polluting countries itself that feel the effects of climate change less, create a migration by the millions. And how will that be dealt with? In manners similar to the way that Israel has ruled over Palestinians. He goes further, quote, "Why have large common carbon-consuming countries allowed the systematic murder of thousands of children in Gaza? Because Hitler has already entered their homes and they are getting ready to defend their high levels of carbon consumption and reject the exodus it causes. What we are seeing in Gaza is a rehearsal of the future." Let us now turn our attention to another front of the US-Israeli war of aggression currently raging through the Middle East. Lebanon has been a main arena of contestation for Israel going back to the Nakba. After securing its grip on the lands of Palestine occupied in 1948, in the early 1960s, Israel began harassing and practicing expansionist designs on Lebanon very early on. We can see in the current phase of Israel's war on Lebanon that Israel has been applying both its West Bank and Gaza models in the country. In the south of Lebanon, Israel is applying the Gaza model of genocidal war, while in the rest of the country, the West Bank model is being implemented. Israel has been treating the government of Lebanon as if it should be the next Palestinian Authority. And tragically, the Lebanese President Joseph Aoun and Prime Minister Nawaf Salam, both of whom are enthusiastically pro-US and Gulf Cooperation Council in orientation and anti-Iran and resistance axis, have been very happy to fill their assigned roles as local policemen on behalf of Israel and Empire. According to the Lebanese Health Ministry, between October 2023 and the first Lebanon ceasefire signed in November 2024, Israeli strikes killed more than 3,900 people in Lebanon, many, including a huge number of health workers, women, and children. And again, in its resumed war, which reignited after March 2nd, 2026, earlier this year, another 4,200 people and counting were killed, 12,000 more injured. More than 1.2 million people have been displaced by Israeli occupation and attack, and most of them remain displaced in Lebanon. At least 37 villages in South Lebanon have been significantly or totally destroyed by Israeli aerial bombings or planned detonations during occupation. Nearly 70 villages remain under occupation, and Lebanese citizens are prohibited from returning, what Israel Katz and Netanyahu say will be permanent exclusion from returning. Like in Gaza, Israel has been targeting and destroying hospitals, medical facilities, killing first responders, sometimes in double, triple, and even quadruple tap strikes, or that is the dropping of a bomb, waiting until rescue workers and people congregate, and bombing again. The Lebanese themselves, far beyond this material loss, according to a mental health and psychosocial support and trauma specialist, Aya Hanna, have now facing loss far beyond these material losses. She goes on to explain, quote, when a village is destroyed, people are not simply losing their homes, they are losing a place that silently organized their identity, relationships, routines, memories, and sense of belonging for years and sometimes generations. People don't just grieve buildings, they grieve what those places represented and made possible. The loss is not only what has existed, but also of what can no longer exist. The campaign in Lebanon has been unevenly experienced as Israel is overwhelmingly targeting Shia Muslims as a community, and what Israel sees as punishment for that community's widespread support for resistance, and specifically political party Hezbollah. In the proud admission of Israeli President Israel Katz, what Israel is doing is turning South Lebanon into Gaza, and this is an admission of genocidal intent and genocidal acts. There is now, like in the picture here, an almost total destruction of all Shia majority frontline border villages. Yet at the same time, there are several Christian majority villages that are still standing and populated. Not only does this reflect Israeli colonial divide and conquer strategy, but the extreme fragmentation of Lebanese society, where state power is apportioned on the basis of a hierarchical system of sectarian representation. This sectarian regime disproportionately privileges Christian, and specifically Maronite Christian, political power, and systematically underrepresents Shia Muslims, widely reckoned to be the largest community and the community most exposed to Israeli occupation, invasion, and attack over decades. This unequal sectarian regime has fueled numerous civil wars in Lebanon and the perpetual domestic polarization historically. This is something I've written about extensively, so I'd welcome further questions you might have about the history and politics of Lebanon in the Q&A. As anthropologist Suzanne Qasim writes, historically, quote, the state has been absent in crucial situations that directly impact people's lives. The Lebanese government has not provided sufficient or sustainable support to the internally displaced as a result of this war. Neither has it addressed the subject of reconstruction of South Lebanon. The government has not defended Lebanese civilians from near daily Israeli attacks and violations. It has not even begun to sufficiently address Israel's unlawful repeated attacks and the destruction even of reconstruction equipment. Its main focus of the Lebanese government, amid pressure from the United States, Israel, the Gulf Cooperation Council, and Western Europe, has rather been on Hezbollah's disarmament. And end quote. Despite Israel's daily killings in Lebanon and the region, the government of Lebanon concluded on the 26th of June the U.S. Israel Lebanon Trilateral Framework Agreement. The Lebanese government intended this to supersede the 18th of June U.S. Iran Memorandum of Understanding, the very first point of which, quote, declared the immediate and permanent termination of military operations on all fronts, including in Lebanon, and ensuring the territorial integrity and sovereignty of Lebanon, end quote. That's a quote from the Iranian Memorandum of Understanding with the U.S. So despite this clear support for Israeli withdrawal, the Lebanese anti-resistance politicians have ignored the common U.S. provenance of the Iranian, the Memorandum of Understanding, and they refer to the Memorandum of Understanding as exclusively as a, quote, Iran agreement that should not have any effect of stopping the Israeli war on Lebanon. Instead, they argue that the Lebanon Framework Agreement ensures that Israeli occupation and aggression will actually remain in Lebanon indefinitely. This is what these politicians refer to as exercising Lebanese sovereignty. This is the importance of Lebanon as a major site of confrontation, this tiny state of just 10,000 or so square kilometers with a population of just a few 6 million people, many of which are not even citizens of the country and are Palestinian refugees or Syrian refugees. It's turned into a major site of contestation in which world balance of power is being hammered out. The struggle between the U.S. and Israeli alliance and the axis of resistance backed by Iran. And neither side has been able to vanquish the other or impose lasting conditions of peace. It has been and will continue. Just a few more minutes here. So in very recent days, the US and Israel have resumed their war on Iran, declaring another blockade on Iranian ships in the Strait of Hormuz and resuming attacks on the country, basically eradicating the Memorandum of Understanding. This is allegedly in response to Iranian attacks on ships that attempted to evade coordination with Iran. The US only recognizes this as a violation of the ceasefire, despite the ambiguity of Iranian actions, because the Memorandum of Understanding actually allowed for Iranian hegemony, Iranian stewardship over the Strait of Hormuz. Now, and the US and Israel have been violating the clauses on Lebanon explicitly since the day one of the agreement and have been threatening war, another violation of the agreement. Why are they resuming this war of aggression? Because neither the US nor Israel can accept the defeat by Iran, which is essentially codified by the Memorandum of Understanding with the United States. The memorandum not only denied the aggressors all their stated war aims, that is, regime change, the end of any Iranian nuclear program, the end of Iran's alliances in the region, the end of its ballistic missile program, but it also confirmed that Iranian stewardship of the Strait of Hormuz, a condition that did not exist before they launched the war of aggression. What the US cannot tolerate is a sovereign Iranian state committed to policies that oppose its own US regional and global project. The war of aggression launched by the US and Israel in February, again defined as the supreme international crime by definition of the Nuremberg decision of the post-World War II order, was launched to destroy the only state in the region that refuses to toe the US-Israeli line. The decision to launch the war was undoubtedly an act of hubris influenced by the impunity for the Israeli destruction of Gaza, the Israeli destruction of Lebanon, the successful regime change in Syria, which was again followed by the abduction of Venezuelan President Nicolas Maduro and his wife, and the installation of a pliant regime there. Trump and the US, Israel felt there's no limits to their power they failed to recognize the considerable limits to their own power. With the political objectives out of reach, the US has now adopted the position of its Israeli client. Continuous punishment will be inflicted, and the performance of impunity on the world stage will be substituted for political victory. For regimes like those headed, I'm just finishing up here. Please allow me just 2 minutes. Any obvious weakness must not be shown or admitted, and all criticism must be preempted by breaking barriers of horror, leaving their opponents stunned and disoriented. What they don't seem to realize is that such cruelty only strengthens the resolve and righteousness of those they are brutalizing, while annihilating their own world legitimacy at home and abroad. So, for better for worse, what we are witnessing is the unraveling of the US-led global order established through the Second World War. The site of that unraveling is notably the Middle East, which, as we saw, was assigned a central political and economic position in the construction of the post-World War II order, based on cheap fossil fuel exploitation, and the cultivation of Western political hegemony and ideological benevolence, as represented in the atonement for the Jewish genocide with the establishment of the State of Israel. Unchecked aggression is now the new ruling mantra in the US-led capitalist imperialist order, and what we are living through is a global counter-revolution against many of the advances brought forward by modern revolutions, such as popular sovereignty, resource sovereignty, state independence and sovereignty in former colonies, social welfare provisions, labor protections, people's mobility, the freedom of expression, association, civil liberties, social equality, ideas of multiculturalism, pluralism, basically any limits to political and economic elites and authorities. The US and European allies seem to be nostalgic for the 19th century age of empire, when they ruled over plantation slave colonies, settler colonies, and protectorates in explicitly undemocratic and hierarchical systems. And I argue the last point is that the statement of purpose for the spirit of this new age, the recolonization of the world, was given by US Secretary of State Marco Rubio in a speech to the Munich Security Conference on February 12, 2026, just before the war of aggression on Iran. You can hear it all here. Quote, for 5 centuries before the end of the Second World War, the West had been expanding. Its missionaries, its pilgrims, its soldiers, its explorers, pouring out from its shores to cross oceans, settle new continents, build vast empires extending across the globe. But in 1945, for the first time since the age of Columbus, it was contracting. Europe was in ruins. Half of it lived behind an iron curtain. The rest looked like it would soon follow. The great Western empires had entered into terminal decline, accelerated by godless communist revolutions and by anti-colonial uprisings that would transform the world and drape the red hammer and sickle across vast swaths of the map in the years to come. Against that backdrop, then as now, many came to believe the West's age of dominance had come to an end, that our future was destined to be a faint and feeble echo of our past. Together, our predecessors recognized that decline was a choice. It was a choice they refused to make. This is what we did together once before, and this is what President Trump and the United States want to do again now, together with you. So, ladies and gentlemen, end quote, the world can no longer afford such a return to past modes of domination. There's no way they'll be able to implement the grandiose designs they'll seek. There's great potential for catastrophic violence being unleashed more widely in its pursuit. We must do everything to end this new global order being constructed in Gaza, Lebanon, Iran, and other sites of imperial impunity. And we need to build a peace based on social justice and cooperation. Many thanks for your attention. I look forward to engaging with your questions and comments.
All right. Thank you, Dr. George, for such an engaging and insightful presentations. We will now continue with the Q&A sessions. We have some questions pop up on the chat box. If for participants, please feel free to ask questions by raising the emoticon. But first, may we read some of the question at the chat box? The first one is from Zohaib Hassan Sain. He proposed two questions, Dr. George. How does the use of state power affect peace and security in today's world? And the second one is, what can the international community do to prevent aggressions between countries and promote peaceful cooperations? Will you directly respond or collect
Yes,
some?
thank you.
Okay.
Thank you for the question, Zahib. Very interesting. So the use of state power, how does it affect peace and security in today's world? Well, state power can be used in various ways. It can be used to create peace and security. Unfortunately, not what we're seeing by the hegemonic powers. And state power can be used to deliberately destroy the idea of peace and security, which is what is being established through the Middle East. These policies are not just about the Middle East, they're also about the way that these governments rule, even domestically in the United States. They're militarizing policing, militarizing immigration enforcement, kidnapping people off the street, killing them daily, actually, security forces. So the idea of the use of force, having restraint, is being revised now by especially the Trump regime, but more than just them, a whole coterie of their allies around the world, and the Israeli model of total impunity, total hierarchy, is what they're seeking to implement, which will obviously not cause peace and security, but will cause global war and insecurity and great exploitation and violence. Question 2, what can the international community do to prevent aggression between countries and promote peaceful cooperation? The international community has to come together to oppose the blatant violation and wars of aggression that are going on now, which is not at all what's happening. The international community is a euphemism, essentially, for the United States and its allies. Nobody talks about the international community in a concrete way as referring to Indonesia in alliance with Lebanon or Colombia or anything like that. The international community is a euphemism for U.S. and its allies. The UN General Assembly, unfortunately, doesn't have any power, and people and various states are being strong-armed and are intimidated by the United States and Israel into not enforcing the Genocide Convention. Marco Rubio just announced yesterday a war on the idea of an international criminal court and a court of justice. This is not new. The U.S. refuses to be it judges everybody and will not allow anyone to judge it, basically. So, there are positive, of course, initiatives by civil society, by activists, by new blocks of counterpowers have to be created. The Hague Group is something we could talk about more, of states that have committed to enforcing international law, especially around Palestine, but have so far not been able to build sufficient power to actually cut off economic relations, for instance, with Israel, or exert significant power. So there has to be collective action by states and people to enforce actually basic international law, which is not being done.
Thank you, Dr. George. Moving to the next question from Muhammad Arif Rahman. Dr. George has highlighted that the question of Palestine deeply structured the balance of power between regional citizens and their domestic regimes. How does this internal domestic pressure affect how these Arab states interpret and or challenge international norms regarding aggressions? Do we see regimes manipulating international legal rhetoric to appease their population while privately maintaining strategic alliances with great powers?
Great question. So, I mean, to be honest, the Arab states don't even use international legal rhetoric to appease their populations to oppose Israel. There's basically a war between these ruling classes and regimes and their populations. Egypt is is a prime example to look at this. There's no claim by the Egyptian authorities. They don't that they're going to threaten the implementation of international law. They don't hardly file any complaints. They go along with all of the Israeli and U.S. Actions, with the important exception in Egypt of, the Israelis wanted to forcibly displace all Palestinians in Gaza to Egypt, to Sinai, which was a non-starter for them. That's the line that they're taking, but you cannot even you can't mobilize demonstrations in support of Palestine in Egypt openly anymore. You used to be able to do that in Egypt under Mubarak, for instance, while you couldn't protest against the local regime. Many people were allowed to protest against the Israeli colonization of Palestine, which was kind of a safety valve. And as soon as that happened in the latest round, people were chanting slogans against the current regime in Egypt, and Sisi, and then they banned freedom of expression, freedom of assembly on even those issues. So all the Gulf states, all the Arab authoritarian states are not. This is not a situation in the 1970s and 80s where demonstrations about Palestine were allowed, or 90s even, or 2000s. They're not even allowing that kind of expressions to go out, because they know the danger of a slippery slope that those criticisms will turn into them. Perhaps in Turkey, there's some more manipulation of legal rhetoric to appease their population while actually maintaining a great strategic alliance with NATO, being part of NATO, which is obviously the main supporters of Israel and Israeli impunity. So, I mean, there's some Turkish posturing on this issue, but that's it. Whereas Iran, there's no contradiction between the state policy and the international and the position of solidarity. They're fighting a war with Palestine for it as well, and for itself, and for world order, really. So, thank you. Yeah. Next question.
Okay. The next question is from Nadia. Do you think Board of Peace a progressive breakthrough or not?
Board of Peace is absolutely not a progressive breakthrough. It's a sort of a attempt to replace the UN Security Council with an extraordinarily vague meeting of leaders, of world leaders that want to the US wants to openly destroy UN and multilateralism. That's what it's about. It doesn't even say that the US president is the head of the Board of Peace. It says Donald Trump is the head of the Board of Peace. And it's not clear what this board will do, if anything will really come out for it. Trump himself seems sort of bored with it now. In the maximal interpretation, they could be seen as replacing effectively the UN Security Council. It's doing that, trying to do that in Gaza, but it seems that will even be left by the wayside, and Israel will be just allowed to do what it wants in Gaza, and no one will intervene.
Well, thank you. The next question is from Ezel. I would like to ask, how should global South nation responded towards UN imperial aggression without reproducing the situations that lead another imperial aggressions like the post-war situations?
Well, I mean, ideally, there needs to be a block of organized power to counter the block of organized U.S. And power of the U.S. and its allies. That's the only thing that can uh, restrain the United States and impunity and aggression, is if people, is collective action of people, citizens, and states. You had more of a check on American power during the Cold War than you do now, with the idea that there would be another power and another nuclear power that states that have policies that do not align with the United States to turn to for political, material, and military support. You had limits to power imposed. You had the limits internationally and domestically. Now the oligarchs in the United States don't see a reason to, for instance, have social welfare protections anymore if there's no more threat of communism, of expropriation. So it's an international and domestic mobilization politics that are being changed in this new world order, new social contract, and one that's away from restraint of democratic accountability or any kind of accountability towards the accumulators of capital or imperial power. The only remedy for this is collective action, concertedly deployed to reverse that.
Well, thank you, Dr. George. From the next one is from Ron. When studying a conflict such as Israel-Palestine, how do historians decide where the story should begin, especially when choosing a starting point can completely change who appears to be the aggressor or the victims?
Well, you start the story with the beginning of the story, which is the late 19th century Zionist movement and settler colonization of Palestine. Despite the ethno-nationalist arguments that, something about talking about Jewish people in all of eternity, or Islamic or Muslim or Christian people in all of eternity, their identity politics for any identity, sure, and ethno-nationalist, revanchist, racist politics that were adopted. But actually, the forms of rule that we're seeing in Palestine are not ancient. This is all datable back to the late 19th century. The ideas of nations and nationalism, again, and before nations and nationalism and the world state system that we have now, you had multi-ethnic empires ruled by a sovereign that had no claim, like the Ottoman Empire, that didn't necessarily claim to represent anybody, but to be ruling on behalf of the benevolence of the Sultan, who was appointed by God, essentially, or has authority appointed by God, and the idea of a state that would be demographically dominated by one ethnic group, in which supremacy in that state would be given explicitly, totally to that one ethnic group, which didn't even exist in Palestine at the time, which were settlers from Europe, from Eastern and Western and Central Europe, that literally had to move and settle and colonize Palestine, and they openly talked about it as settler colonization of Palestine from the late 19th century all the way until the end of the Second World War, when colonialism got a bad name. If you look back, they're always talking about the colonization of Palestine. We are colonizing Palestine. That's where the Palestine movement, the question of Palestine it can be studied from, not from any time before that. It doesn't make sense to talk about anything later. You don't start history on October 7th. October 7th was preceded by 78 years of the Nakba, of pushing Palestinians into the concentration camp of the Gaza Strip. So this is a modern conflict of the modern world. It doesn't bear relation to previous modes of politics and conflicts, and that's what we have to separate that very carefully. It's not an eternal ancient battle between Jews, Christians, and Muslims.
Okay, Dr. George. The next ones. Considering that the Trump administrative was approaching the end of its terms and facing increasing political pressure, do you think its stronger alignment with Israel was driven solely by strategic foreign policy interests, or was it also influenced by domestic electoral calculations and needs to consolidate political support?
Absolutely both. Tiara, great question. That's why I say it's neither a purely question of U.S. empire and imperial foreign policy interests or the domestic machinations of an Israeli lobby. An imperial polity is and understanding the world like this is you have to know domestic and international politics. There used to be more emphasis on the relationship between the domestic and the international, particularly by Marxist international relations scholars. But you see that, the popular opinion does not make foreign policy. Special interests make foreign policies. The electoral systems of a country determine the electoral laws. How is representation structured? Determine who attains political power. And you have a huge realignment now in the UK and the US and all of the Western world between, whereas support for Israel was seen as a popular thing, and that manufacturing of consent happened. I alluded to it a bit in the talk about the creation of Israel as this idea of a benevolent, is either fighting the good fight against barbarism and backward anti-Semites, terrorists, or something, in the U.S. or in the Middle East, Arabs, basically the darker hordes, basically bringing enlightenment to the East. This total colonial trope. It was seen as even progressive in form, and it was mainly had support from the European and American left wing as after World War II as being Israel's instantiating socialism and the kibbutzim and things like that. It's anti-racist. It's a vindication for a racist history. Conservatives weren't the main supporters of Israel in Europe and the West. They were actually still harboring more anti-Semitic ideology and were distant from Israel until they came to see the utility of it as their model, as an ideal type of an ethno-nationalist fortress state. So it's both domestic and international, and that's why you have such fierce battles for freedom of expression in the United States and the United Kingdom and all over Europe. What you're allowed to say and not say about Palestine is an internal battle as much as it is an external battle, because all of our fates are tied up within the battle of Palestine. It's not just something over there for Palestinians or for Arabs. It's a global divide between global Israel and global Palestine, as scholars like Ilan Pape have argued.
The last question, I guess, from
we have many online that are actually present that could have been waiting to ask questions. Perhaps we could take some of them and at once, and at least they'd be able to hear them, and I can answer some of them in a combined format.
Okay, everyone, feel free to ask by raising your hand or
Well, I see Ivan at the top of my screen right now. Maybe he can go.
Thank you so much, the organizing committee and Professor George, for an opportunity to listen to the insightful lecture. So, Professor George, I have a number of questions regarding your lecture. So the first one, considering the US hegemony, how do you, could we state that basically the established system comprised of the IMF and the WTO have been serving the capitalist imperialism since the Second World War? That's my first question. Second, under the US national security strategy and the national defense strategy, it's stated that number one priority of the US administration is basically the Western Hemisphere. And how do you assess the possibility of the US invasion to Cuba? And third question is, how do you assess the chances of the Republican Party of the US in the upcoming November elections to Congress? Thank
I
you.
can answer these. Thank you for these questions. I can answer them very quickly. Absolutely, the WTO and the IMF were set up as main instruments of American capitalist imperialism after World War II. A great older book about this subject that goes into this in detail is called, very appropriately, The Limits of Power by Gabriel and Joyce Kolko. It's from the 1970s, a new left history of the end of World War II and US foreign relations. It goes into the setting up of NATO, setting up of the WTO, IMF as instruments of capitalist imperialism. Also, recent books by like Quinn Slobodian on globalists goes extensively into the WTO, talking about how this trade organization was seen by its architects as the extension of empire and encrust and encasing an imperial system, even in this post-war order where empire was supposedly supposed to be done with. The Republicans, well, I'm expecting them to be massacred in the upcoming elections. For they are the Trump regime is not even pleasing its own base. It's causing extraordinary economic hardships for dubious gains. The Trump policies domestically with ICE and police killings, police harassment, these are tremendously unpopular. And even many of his own supporters have felt that they've stepped over the line. And the kind of the facade of them being a populist party serving popular interests against elites is extremely difficult to sustain. I don't expect them to do very well. They've appeared to betray even their own principles. I don't expect even the Democratic Party. There's a shift in political representation going on in places like the U.S. and the U.K., and the Democrats are going to change and shift as well. We saw that it's likely to shift to the left with elections of people like New York Mayor Mamdani, the son of scholar Mahmoud Mamdani that I quoted here, and a new generation who are mobilized around Palestine as a central issue that connects local and international power. And if we can take quickly a couple more questions from Moch and Garin and Nathan. Just if you can say them quickly, I'll try to answer as much as I can.
Okay, thank you for the opportunity and the insightful lecture. Could you talk us through about the history of Zionism and how can such a small group of people influence the whole world and big nations and a politician that they bow down to Israel? And could you explain the history, and is there uh, um, is it different from the Jewish religion, and do they get their ideologies from Talmud or Torah or not? Thank you.
Okay, next question, quickly.
Karen,
Okay,
please.
thanks, Sir George. So basically, I just try to connect with Rentier State. Maybe you have heard about that because I learned Middle Eastern Studies as my master also. So my question is, if we try to take a look when the U.S. against Iran and also Venezuela, both country has a plenty or the largest oil reserves. So my question is, do you agree the invasion, the aggression by the US to Iran now is just because of fossil fuel power, and also to what extent oil could be a leverage tool in the geopolitical situation for nowadays? So that's my question. Thank you.
Okay, final question from Nathan.
Oh, all right. So my question is will be short. Could Pan-Arabism as a concept could be conceived in the near future, or it will fail due to like different political views in the Arab states? I think that will be all.
Thank you very much for all these important questions. Big questions in many cases, but I can give you brief answers. Moch, first of all, absolutely there's a separation between Zionist ideology and practice and the Jewish religion, no question. In fact, the founders of Zionism were all secular atheists in the majority. People like Theodor Herzl, David Ben Gurion, for instance, they were not religious Zionists. They racialized, essentially what Zionism did was a self-racialization. They said that no matter what our experience in Europe shows, that we're a minority, the majority is Christian, and wherever we've existed as a minority, we face discrimination. The solution is to become a majority in a Jewish state somewhere else, and to have Jewish sovereignty. And that we're not particularly religious. It doesn't matter if we're religious or not. We'll always would be rejected by Christian civilization. So we have to create a Jewish state where we can be secular, we can be religious. It's not dependent on the teachings of the Torah or anything like that. And there has been over time, religious Zionism has risen and become a very potent force in Israel, especially Smotrich, Ben Gvir. These ministers express a religious interpretation of Zionism, but you need not to be religious to be a Zionist. You don't have to be Jewish to be a Zionist. Something that Joe Biden would say all the time. For instance, in fact, most Zionists, people who support the colonization of Palestine, are not Jewish. Now, how did they? So there's great books written about this. Things like scholars such as Israeli scholars, even like Gabriel Peterberg has written a very informative book called The Returns of Zionism, about the settler colonial ideology of Zionism. It's about racial supremacy of a group, creating a hierarchical system that empowers some and disempowers others. And this is how the secret of the Zionist success is that they've aligned themselves in each phase with different powers, the leading global hegemon of the imperialist white European power of the time. First, the British Empire, then the American Empire. In between, even the French Empire. So they appeal to global ideas of white supremacy. They appeal to the Western civilization. This is how, and they attach themselves, as right now, to the US. And they don't care about the rest of the world because they know if we have the support of the US, what do we need the rest of the world for? We could be doing what we can in the face of the rest of the world, and no one will be able to do anything about it as long as we have the support of the global hegemon and the ruling classes and the powerful in each society. There's also a good book by Ilan Pappé on the history of the Zionist lobby and across the Atlantic, talking about the domestic ways that Zionism is also a social movement in places like the US and the UK. And it's driven by racial supremacy, basically. That's the short answer.
Oh, I believe that the time
We're out of
has
time?
run out, I guess. Yeah.
Okay, sorry.
Sorry, everyone. The time has run out. Now we are approaching to the end of the sessions. Before we close this session, we will have short documentation session. May I kindly all of participants turn on your cameras, and committee, please guide us for the documentations.
All right. Before we officially conclude today's activities, let's capture one last moment together. Kindly turn on your cameras and give us your brightest smile. Is everyone ready? All right. 3, 2, 1, smile. Okay.
Well, thank you. On behalf of Department of International Relations, our sincere appreciation to Dr. George for joining us today. Thank you very much, everyone. That concludes our afternoon session with Dr. Nathaniel George. Now I will return the session to the MC. Thank you, everyone.
All right, what an excellent way to conclude today's discussions. Our sincere thanks to Dr. Nathaniel George and our respected moderator, Mr. Muhammad Subhan, for sharing such insightful perspective with all of us.
Today's discussion on aggression and state power in contemporary international politics has certainly deepened our understanding of the complexities surrounding international politics, state behavior, and the evolving global order.
We would also like to express our sincere appreciation to all participants for your enthusiasm, thoughtful questions, and active participation throughout today's program. And that brings us to the end of the day 3 of the IRUD Summer Course 2026. We sincerely hope today's discussions have broadened your perspectives and inspired meaningful reflection on contemporary issues in international relations.
Once again, we would like to express our heartfelt gratitude to our distinguished speakers and moderators for generously sharing their expertise and valuable insights. Our sincere appreciation also goes to all participants for their enthusiasm and active participation, as well as to the organizing committee for making today's program possible.
Before we conclude, we would like to share a brief reminder regarding our program schedule. Please note that the closing ceremony will be held during our final session on August 13 rather than on day 5. We sincerely apologize for any inconvenience this adjustment may cause and truly appreciate your kind understanding.
Thank you once again for being part of the IRUD Summer Course 2026. We hope to see you again in our next session. Until then, continue exploring new ideas, embracing different perspectives, and remember to speak up, think deep, and dig deeper.
Thank you, everyone. Have a pleasant afternoon. Stay safe and see you at the next day of the IRUD Summer Course 2026.
Thank you, everybody. Have a great day.